Good morning, students. I am Dr. Anurag Agrawal, and this is OSN Academy Private Limited, an academy which is known since 1998 for UGC NET. It is a moment of great pleasure that today I am going to start the new batch, which is our second batch, Pan India, where again the students from the entire country would be connected with us for the next examination, December 2019, as well as for many other examinations which will be conducted from time to time, like state eligibility test, like PGT, PhD entrances, and any other top level literature exams. And always remember one thing, students, that if you are my student, then you have to work religiously under my guidance. Be in touch with me and always follow my guidance as I have been teaching innumerable students since 1998. Yes, one more thing to be kept in mind that the students have to engage themselves in studies and focus on their goals. And for this, achieving their goal, the offline program in Lucknow is going to start from 7th of July, where students can sit with me in front of me in a proper classroom environment. This is not possible for every student. So to get that level of expertise and experience, it is a blessing for students to get my live online classes, that is video classes, which will be interactive for all of you. The students will be provided 5 days a week classes, Monday to Friday, and with the new enriched new syllabus which has been with us since the January 2019. And with minimum of the fees, the students pan India are able to afford this live video classes, and the entire syllabus will be covered in the next 4 months. So the first of all, I would start with the Anglo-Saxon period to give you a basics that how any student has to know about the starting of literature and how we progress in the classes. So start with the Anglo-Saxon period, which starts from 449 and goes up to 1066. So students, why? What is the reason we date the Anglo-Saxon period from 449 to 1066? Do you know the answer? According to the traditions, it was in 449 that the first band of the Germanic people, they crossed the North Sea, Samudra, to Britain to settle in what is now the country of Kent. They were Jutes from the peninsula of Jutland in Denmark, and they were the first of many such invaders. Means there were many invaders who keep on coming. So they were one of them. And following the Jutes came the Angles and the Saxons. And together these invaders created the Anglo-Saxon England. We can even say Angle land, which lasted until 1066, when the Norman French, led by William, that is the Duke of Normandy, successfully invaded and conquered the entire country. From 449 to 1066 is a long time, approximately 6 centuries. And England during this period was not the unified country which it is today. And most of the time, the land was divided into little kingdoms. And during the last 2 centuries of this period, the Anglo-Saxons had to contend with the Viking invaders. And these Viking invaders are also known as Danes by the English. And they were these people who at one time controlled about half of England and threatened the rest of the England. Most of these 6 centuries come within a period frequently described as the Dark Ages. Very important. Each and every line, student, is very important for you. So be very, concentrate on this lecture. Most of these 6 centuries which come within a period, as I have just told you, which is frequently described as Dark Ages. And why this is described as Dark Ages, you should also know this answer. This description meant to suggest a time of barbarism, a time of ignorance, confusion, violence, which generally considered by the historians to be misleading. We should not say that this 600 years are to be said as Dark Ages. इसको ऐसा नहीं कहना चाहिए. That is why some historians are of the opinion that this word is misleading. These ages were not as dark as they were once thought to be. They were by no means without knowledge, communications, trade, handicrafts of a high order. So how can you say that this age was a dark age when you have knowledge, communication, trade, art, craft, everything of a very high order? It is also true that it was a time filled with violence, cruelty, confused fighting. But then, if we see our own world today, do you think that we are free from such vices and follies even today? So can we say that India is a country which we are facing the dark age? No. That is why this term is often misleading, as said by the historians. What plunged the Western world into comparative darkness was the collapse of the vast Roman Empire, which for centuries and centuries together had maintained order in northern Britain to distant Arabia. It was possible at the height of the Roman Empire to travel on post roads and use the same currency from what is now the north of England to the Middle East, beyond the Red Sea. It has never been possible to do this since that time, for all our talk of progress. And for years, far longer than the British ruled India, the southern half of the Britain had been part of the Roman Empire. And the first Roman invasion was a series of raids by no other than Julius Caesar from 57 to 50 BC. And students, nearly a century later, lagbhag 100 saal baad, the Roman conquest of Britain was made under the Emperor Claudius. And once they had conquered the British inhabitants, a Celtic people, Celtic, the Roman legions remained as defenders. But when, in about 410, Roman forces were finally withdrawn to protect Rome itself, the Jutes, the Angles, the Saxons began their successful invasions. And if ever you visit England, you can find fascinating remains of Roman Britain, such as the ruins of public baths or of the tiled floors of Roman villas. And much of the great highways of England have as their foundation the original military roads made by the Roman legions. Then, students, I would tell you something about the Germanic invasions. After the Roman legions had gone, what happened? The Britons, Britons, were no match for the invaders from across the North Sea. And the Britons, however, did not retreat to the mountains and the moors without a struggle. Behind the half-legendary King Arthur, afterwards transformed into a hero of medieval romance, was the figure of a Celtic leader who organized the determined resistance. But the invaders from the north and the east arrived in wave after wave, that is, Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes, taking the possession of the best land and creating kingdoms of their own. This is mine, this is mine, this is mine. And the most important being Kent, K-E-N-T, Northumbria, Mercia, and Wessex. Before long, the Anglo-Saxons were compelled to organize themselves into larger units in order to resist further invasions. Political power then shifted from that, this is Kent or Northumbria, to Mercia or Wessex, the kingdom of Alfred the Great. As early as 787 men from the farther north, the terrible Norsemen, N-O-R-S-E-M-E-N, the Danes or the Vikings, began their raiding and burning. Some of these Danes eventually settled in the northern and the eastern England, bringing with them their own customs, their own laws, their own attitudes of mind that long outlasted the Norman conquest. The political and the military history of these times, roughly from the 8th century to the middle of the 11th, is confused, is chaotic. But yes, a few important facts do stand out. Exceptional Anglo-Saxon king like Alfred the Great were successful in their struggle against the Norse invaders. Also, the Anglo-Saxons were converted to Christianity, partly through the efforts of Celtic missionaries. And these Celtic missionaries were from Ireland, from Scotland, but mostly through missionaries from Rome. Saint Augustine, who was sent by the Pope Gregory the Great, was the most important of these. Augustine became the first Archbishop of Canterbury, and he promoted the spread of Christianity throughout the kingdom. And when the kingdom was conquered by William of Normandy in 1066, it had long been Christian. So students, I hope you must be enjoying the starting of literature, how we delve into the world of literature, but without knowing these basics. The next comes the Anglo-Saxons. Although, students, so much of it even then was Danish in laws, customs, and characteristics, we can call the kingdom conquered by the Norman Anglo-Saxons. What kind of people were the Anglo-Saxons? Before we answer this, we should remember that the Anglo-Saxons were victims of the bad habit, typical of many invaders, of considering that the conquered people have a much lower level of civilization than their own, that they are mere barbarians whose defeat is inevitable and a sign of the world's progress. One might imagine that the Anglo-Saxons were fit only to be the serfs of the Norman conquerors, but this idea is quite false. Indeed, we can say that the Normans were superior principally in government organizations, in military organizations, in tactics, in architecture. In many other respects, they were inferior to the Anglo-Saxon civilization that they conquered, but they did not entirely destroy. Probably everybody knows that the Anglo-Saxons were hardy and brave, as stubborn in defense as the ordinary English soldiery had ever been since. and Anglo-Saxon society was comparatively well developed, branching out from the family unit to the clan and tribe and then to the kingdom. While the Anglo-Saxons easily developed great loyalty to their chosen leaders, they had a natural tendency toward what we call now a democratic habit of mind. That is, they liked to hold the meetings in which people could openly express what they thought and what they felt. ये बहुत जरूरी था जो वो करते थे. Now, students, we would talk about the Anglo-Saxon civilization. Anglo-Saxons, what I have read, had a highly developed feeling for beauty. They had a passion for fine ornaments, and their craftsmen produced many beautiful pieces such as brooches, bracelets of beautiful designs and workmanship. They were in fact more artistic and poetic people than their Norman conquerors, who were essentially soldiers and administrators. And behind the glory of English literature as it has come down to us, धीरे धीरे हमारे पास आया है ना ये, is a mixture of Celtic and Anglo-Saxon temperaments. And it is easy for an American student living far away in time and space from these Anglo-Saxon people to imagine that what was thought and felt so long ago, so far away, is completely unimportant today except to the historian and the scholar. But this is wrong. We are all in the same continuous living web of history that contains these ancient people. And to take one example, consider these names of the days of the week: Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. All these names are derived from the names of the old Anglo-Saxon gods. Maybe you might not be knowing this fact. Even many basic American traditions in law, conduct, outlook, language, literature are what? Are a legacy. Are a legacy from the Anglo-Saxons. So we are actually what? We are indebted to Anglo-Saxons. Now, we will talk about, in brief, Anglo-Saxon literature. Long after they had been converted to Christianity and had developed a civilization which is recognizable, the Anglo-Saxons were fond of feasting to celebrate successful battles or expeditions. Songs, gay or melancholy, it was sung. Heroic tales were retold, or the poet, as an all-round entertainer, put elaborate riddles to his audience. Although with the coming of the church, our written literature had begun to evolve. The great tradition, which persisted for centuries, it was oral, not written down, but committed to memory by generation after generation after generation of poets, of minstrels. The alliteration which the Anglo-Saxons used and their rhythms of poetry awaken a strong emotional response, as we all know, as we all have read in the books. But for the Anglo-Saxons, who lived long before the printed books arrived, and indeed long before the poets could read and write, these poetic devices also served another purpose, that is, as aids to memory. And when we find ourselves remembering a nursery rhyme, as we often do just because it has alliteration and has a strong marked rhythm, we might give a thought to the old Anglo-Saxon poets standing in the halls, chanting the music, the poetry. Although there must have been a great wealth of heroic narrative words, and later on what we call dramatic monologues of a high lyrical nature. highly suitable for recitation, very little has survived. We have only the great epic Beowulf, portions of the other epics, together with the later fragments of battle pieces, some religious poems, and a small piece of group of dramatic poems, of which we know the Seafarer, which is an excellent example. And one reason so little Anglo-Saxon poetry has come down to us is that in the 9th century, the conquering Danes plundered the monastery libraries and destroyed many records of the Anglo-Saxon civilization and literature. Also, although we are indebted to monks for much of the Anglo-Saxon literature which has survived, but some monks deplored the pagan spirit of the older Anglo-Saxon poems and so saw no reason to transcribe the works which were essentially pagan in spirit. And much of the Anglo-Saxon poetry that has survived till today, including Beowulf, contains Christian graftings on essentially pagan beliefs. And on the other hand, some of the surviving poems are dramatic retellings of what? Can anybody tell me, students? Those who are watching me? जो surviving poems हैं students, वो क्या हैं? They are dramatic retellings of biblical events. Retelling of the biblical events. The churchmen who wrote verse generally wrote in Latin, though occasionally they included lines in English. And it was from their imitation of church hymns in Latin that the gradual introduction of rhyme into English words developed. And the earlier prose writers and chroniclers among the Anglo-Saxon churchmen also wrote in Latin. So my next lecture is based on father of English poetry, that is Chaucer, because Chaucer comes next, that is the 14th century, and every student must have read about Godfrey Chaucer, the father of English poetry.